waiting for Itai Dzamara. On that warm sunny day, Nakutenda was the first to spot me. I could barely hear him reply my question, saying his mother was home. Following quickly behind, his younger sister Nenyasha, was quite a contrast. She said hello with a wide smile, a partially eaten mango in her hand. Their mother arrived, peering through the hand-hole of their sky-blue gate. "Wait," she said, "let me get rid of the dog." We arranged ourselves inside the cottage. Shefra and her son sat opposite each other with me on a sofa in between. The room was crowded with furniture, a 4-plate stove, lounge suite, display cabinet and a coffee table. A dark, single window above Nakutenda let in the afternoon light. I asked Shefra how they were. "We're okay. We're not great because Itai isn't here. We don't know if he's alive." Her response was weary. "It's very difficult. Every day I think that I'll hear him coming through the gate. I think maybe I'll see him on the news, or someone will send me a WhatsApp text message. These days, my phone is always on, ready to receive news that Itai has been found. Maybe someone will call, and he'll be on the other end, or someone will give us information about where he is or tell us he's on his way back. It's hard to live like this, every day waiting to hear good news." Itai Dzamara, a 35-year-old husband and father, was allegedly abducted by 4 men while getting his hair cut on a Monday morning. Months before his abduction, he had presented a petition demanding the resignation of Robert Mugabe, the former president of Zimbabwe. We fell in love. Shefra is one of 2 girls in a family of 5. She met Itai in a commuter omnibus as they traveled home to Highfield in the evening after work. Then, he was a reporter for the Zimbabwe Independent, while she worked for a printing company. "We were friends for a while," she says of the early days of their courtship. "He would walk me home from the combis. Sometimes he would visit me at work. He always brought me lunch," she laughed. "We fell in love. When he proposed, he said, 'I want you to be my wife. I love you.' It was simple." In 2004, Zimbabwe had enough of an economy for them both to be employed. They could plan and look forward to building a life together. Itai had honored her and her family in the traditional way by finishing his lobola payments, allowing them to have a church wedding according to the custom. He was a generous husband, helping her mother to provide for Shefra's younger siblings and assisting her family with their school fees. Like most, their early years together were punctuated by the arrival of their children. The birth of their oldest child, Nakutenda, brought joy and sadness. "I went to his mother in Mutoko because I craved peanut butter and mangoes so badly," she explained. She was pregnant with twins. In Mutoko, Shefra went into early labor. The babies were born 2 months before term at All Souls Mission, the same hospital as their father. One twin survived for only a few days. When the twin died, Itai was hurt. I was hurt too, but I was grateful that God left me with one child. They named the surviving twin Nakutenda. In 2012, Shefra gave birth to a girl. "It was a good pregnancy," Shefra says. Save for a long and painful labor, compared to Nakutenda, Nenyasha was born without any complications at Glenview 1 Clinic. "He wanted to give our children a better life." By 2014, the paltry gains made by the government of national unity between and halting an economic freefall were beginning to reverse. Jobs were scarce, and those who were employed were finding it very difficult to make ends meet. Itai had resigned his job at the Zimbabwe Independent and founded Occupy Africa Unity Square, a social movement, dedicating his life to fighting for Mugabe's resignation. Trusting her husband, Shefra supported his decision. He said God had told him this was what he needed to do. That we would be fine, our family would be taken care of. I didn't need to be a part of it or say anything publicly, but he asked me to pray. Itai was like that. Once he made up his mind, that was it. The petition Itai authored was discussed between them often. When I asked if she helped to author it, Shefra shrugged off the notion, saying he was the author and editor. He wanted his wife to see his motivation for placing himself squarely in the crosshairs of the state security apparatus. He wanted her understanding and support despite her being afraid. He used to say that the working class were not being paid fair wages. He wanted to give our children a better life. But the money he was getting, for the work he was doing, wasn't enough. I was so afraid for him. I knew I had to pray. If it was going to the hospital, then that's where I would be. Itai, and two members of the Occupy movement, Phyllis Finai Apfumbi and Tichona Dano hand-delivered the petition to the president's office at Munhumutapa building in Harare. The response was immediate. 30 minutes after they had left, Itai received a call and a man asked the trio to return. They were not beaten the first time. Instead, they spent a long day underground at Harare Central Police Station being interrogated and intimidated. In a Daily News article, Itai described how they were treated with respect, but the unspoken threat of violence hovered between themselves and state agents. Several officials, in suits, accompanied us and made sure to move in a manner that kept us well encircled. Straight to a very small room at the back, we were led. Fierce-looking police officers were crammed in a little room, about 7 of them, with a couple of AK-47 rifles at the back of a few and on tables. He is quoted saying, "When intimidation failed, Itai wrote that the state agents turned to open threats. They reminded me that they could brutally beat me up with an assortment of sjamboks, iron bars and wood planks that were in abundance in the room. I said I could take it." In the face of his determination, Itai described how the agents proceeded to bargain with him.